I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. That'll be my home. That'll be my home. First things first, we got to talk about how to set this instrument up. Everybody already knows how to set the bridge on this thing. You know that you measure the distance from the nut to the 12th fret. You match that distance from the 12th fret to your bridge. You want your bridge to be slightly angled. You see my bridge has got sort of a jaunty, just like my hat. It's angled a bit, and that's what you want, okay? And then you test it by, you strike a string open, and then when you do the natural harmonics, I call it, you just hold a chime over the 12th fret. You should get the same note. And then you know that the instrument is, then you know, dogs are barking at somebody down there at the road. So once you do this, then you know that the instrument, you've set the bridge right and the intonation is correct, right? So boom, that's that little lesson. But there's a lot more to it than that. First things you want to do is check out the peg head on this banjo. Look at how the strings go on it. When you put your strings on your banjo, you always want to wind the strings from the bottom of the post. You see that? How my strings come from the bottom? You don't want your strings wound so that they come off the top of the peg to the bridge. You want them to come from the bottom of the peg to the bridge. So what that is, the idea, you see how the peg head is angled down? That's to get maximum tension behind the bridge. So in order, and just to help that effect, I mean, this is like basic geometry of the banjo that we all need to know. In order to help the peg head do its job, that angle, you want to wind your strings so that they come from the bottom. Another note here is I'm using nylon strings. I recommend everybody use nylon strings, especially if you're, God forbid, if you're using a 19th century antique banjo with steel strings on it. Please stop doing that immediately and put nylon strings on it. Nylon strings are cheap, readily available, and that's what this instrument is meant to hold up under. It's not meant to hold up under the pressure of steel strings. We can get into the nitty-gritty of that more, but that's the basic gist of it. So if you're using nylon strings like me, you also want to have some kind of knot in the peg head. I mean, we have to get a damn microscope to see this, but you have to figure this out, details of this out for yourself. But you'll see that there's a hole in the post of each peg, and that's where the string passes through, and then you wind it from the bottom. Looks nice like mine does, right? And when it goes through that hole, the first thing you do is make a little knot there. All I do is I just tuck the string under itself and twist it, and then I start wrapping it around the post. Let's see if I can get real close on that. You want some kind of little knot there, some kind of overlap itself or something, so that the string binds itself to the post. You'll figure it out very quickly. Another thing you can do, I've got a bag of props for this first course. I promise y'all I'm not going to be constantly pulling stuff out of a bag. Thought I had something. Another thing you can do is, on nylon or gut strings, is once you get this set up, you can take you a flame source. Oh my God, it's windy as could be today. I don't know if I'm going to do this out here. Take you a flame source, melt the tips of these strings. So that's how you want your peg head arranged and your strings up there. The fifth string is a lot more forgiving. Basically just wrap it around, tie you another knot here. If you're using nylon strings, wrap it around, put it through, and that's how you do that. We got to talk about tail pieces now. Okay. So first let's note the tail piece I have on this banjo. That is an antique 1880s tailpiece. The best tailpieces you can have are adjustable tailpieces like this one. This is a Kirschner tailpiece, and you basically, it works for steel strings or gut. If you have gut strings or nylon, you're going to wrap them around these little posts and twist them over themselves and then run them through each hole. If you have steel strings, you're just going to loop it around each post and run it in the hole. But the beauty of this is that it's adjustable. It has a little knob back here. You twist this knob and it increases downward pressure of the tailpiece, and we're going to talk about why that's important. Another really good, like best tailpiece you can get, this is harder to come by. This is an Ottinger tailpiece. On this one, notice you have a knob for each clamp. The strings are individually, works for nylon, gut, or steel strings. Each string is clamped in here, it runs up here, it goes in this little nook, and each string, the pressure is adjusted with its own knob. So that's the Ottinger tailpiece. That's the best tailpiece you can get out there. So now the question arises, so Cliff, if the Kirschner and the Ottinger are the two best tailpieces, then how come you don't use either one of them? Well, this comes into play with antique banjos a lot. This is a Luscombe banjo. These were built by Thompson and Odell from roughly 1887 to, I don't know, probably like 1900 when they quit making this particular model. It's got an unusual rim size. The rim is 11 5/8 diameter across, and the way that they designed this, the way that they made the length of the scale from the nut to the bridge, this was in vogue in the 1880s. The bridge sets very close to the rim. So, on this banjo, I don't have the distance to fit that Kirschner tailpiece. You see, it's way too close to the back of the bridge. It just didn't work for me. It just made the bridge flop over every time. So I couldn't do that, and then I tried this Ottinger. I wanted to put this beautiful, like crazy fancy Ottinger tailpiece on this banjo, but the Ottinger is too wide to fit between these tension hooks. So in other words, my brackets are too close together to accommodate this fat Ottinger. This Ottinger is a later design. I mean, the Kirschner came out, I want to say, in like 1900, and I think the Ottinger came out a little bit later. And by then, you know, they were probably putting fewer brackets on banjos, right? Other thing we need to talk about with setup is my bridge. This white-ass banjo head. But you'll notice the bridge that I'm using, let's just take out a couple of examples that we can look at. This is the bridge that everybody uses. The three-legged bluegrass bridge with its maple with the ebony cap on top. The problem with these bridges is that they're designed for steel strings. If you're using steel strings, and again, I mean, this is a bluegrass bridge, really. This was developed for bluegrass banjo. So if you want to play traditional banjo, this is not really the ideal bridge for you. If you're using nylon strings, this is not the bridge you want to use. I mean, the whole point of the point of the ebony is to keep steel strings from cutting into the softer maple underneath, right? And it also mutes those steel strings. Steel strings on a solid maple bridge with no cap, it sounds very open and sort of twangy and hollow. So for example, if you run steel strings over this antique bridge, this is just a three-legged antique bridge, solid maple bridge. If you run steel strings over that, it's going to sound very hollow and twangy. It's not going to sound good. So what they needed to do for steel strings was mute it with the ebony on top. So you're muting the banjo, and that's great if you're using steel strings because you want to mute them a little bit. But if you're using nylon strings, like if I used this bridge on this banjo, it wouldn't work for several reasons, and one reason why I would not do it is it wouldn't sound good. Nylon strings when they go across this ebony, it mutes them, and they might still sound good, but they're going to sound so much better if you run your nylon strings across a solid maple bridge like this. There's a few makers who are making them. If you're in the United States, I recommend Joel Hicks. Joel Hicks, Joel Hicks. Look him up. I don't want to give his website right now because it might change. I don't know. But look up Joel Hicks, and you can get a really quality bridge from him in the United States. He's based out of Vermont, I believe, or New Hampshire, one of those states up there. He has access to really high quality, hard maple, and he knows what he's doing. And he charges a very fair price for his bridges. That's Joel Hicks. The other source is Clifford Essex. Clifford Essex. E-S-S-E-X. That's over in England, in the United Kingdom, UK. They seem to be in and out of business. I don't know. But they make a ton of bridges when they are in business. So you should be able to find a Clifford Essex bridge, solid maple, classic banjo bridge is what they call them. They call them classic banjo. I could just call it a traditional bridge, but that hasn't caught on, you know. They call it classic banjo bridge. So that's probably the source to go to if you're in Europe. The main point of what differentiates a good banjo bridge from a bad banjo bridge, again, they need to be solid maple, they need to be made of very hard maple, and they need to be very narrow as you're comfortable with, as narrow as possible along the ridge, along the top of the bridge. You can see this one. That one's not terribly narrow, but a fancy one would be even narrower than this. Okay, the other thing as far as banjo setup is we need to talk about head tension. Get one that's not so bright. That'll look better on camera. So here's an old minstrel style bridge, an old minstrel style banjo. And you'll see I have synthetic heads on both of these. If you have skin heads, that's great. Skin heads sound the best. Calfskin head sounds the best, actually, I think. Another reason that calfskin is superior, and this is something that I know to be a fact, is that a good quality, a pure white calfskin head with no translucent spots in it and stuff like that, a good white calfskin head is way less impervious to the elements than a goatskin head is. And you can see here I'm outside. I like to film and play music outside a lot. It's very humid today. I've gone to just cheap frosted plastic heads on all my banjos as much as I can. But if you are using skin, just know that goat absorbs moisture way quicker than calfskin. So if you have a goatskin head, you're going to get out in the weather, you're going to get a lot more variation in head tension and consequently in your bridge height if you use goat skin. That's why calfskin was used by virtually all of the makers from the 1880s to the 1930s. Calfskin is a superior material. So how tight should you tension your head? It doesn't matter. you don't want it to burst, right? So don't burst the head. That's the main thing. Other than that, mess around with it, play with it, get it to where you personally like it. My mentor George Gibson up in Kentucky, he uses old antique calfskin heads on most of his banjos. He likes to keep them kind of loose, so his banjos have kind of a dark humming, vibrating nature to them that he likes, and I love the way it sounds. George also uses steel strings. He uses light gauge steel strings, you know. So those are two things that I don't do anymore. I wouldn't recommend, but he does. So it's, you know, it's up to you, right? Me personally, I like the banjo head to be as tight as possible. This is like a Renaissance head that they're making. It's synthetic. I've got it as tight as possible on this banjo, and I think it sounds great. This is also a solid maple bridge from Joel Hicks. That's another high quality bridge. Can't recommend Joel Hicks enough if you want a good quality traditional bridge. That's really about all there is to say about it. I mean, people ask me about how to maintain their banjo. So here's a paintbrush. Your banjo will get dusty, and if you don't play it, you might leave it in the case, it might get like white mold spots on it. I have a paintbrush here that's never had paint on it, but it has a natural vegetable oil on it. This is hemp oil, I believe, that's on this right now. Don't smother the banjo with oil. What you can do is dip the brush in oil and then kind of brush it off on a surface, on a piece of wood or something, so that the bristles are oily but not soaking in oil. And then you go about cleaning all of the metal hardware on your banjo. Just brush it off, and you'll see I'm not leaving any oil behind. It's just sort of an oily brush, but it's not leaving any oil behind. What this is doing is taking off all the grime, and look how much cleaner it's looking where I brush. So all you need to do is this. Now, one thing you don't want to do is get any oil on the head of your banjo. This is a synthetic head, so it doesn't matter if I get oil on the head of this banjo, whatever. But if you are using a goat skin head, God forbid, or if you're using a calfskin head, don't ever put oil on that, because those are both made of rawhide. Rawhide's never had any oil put to it. In fact, it's been dried and salted to have all of the moisture and oil pulled out of it. So rawhide, you don't ever want to oil rawhide, because then it starts becoming leather, and leather doesn't make a good banjo head. So that's just the main point. If you're doing this with skin head, be very careful not to get any oil on the skin. For me, it doesn't matter. So I'm going over, I'm cleaning, brushing all this crap off, making this thing as one I don't play often. It's just been hanging. And you can do the same thing, you know, cleaning all this stuff off. All right, the other thing to do is, whenever you get, let's just go ahead and pop a string off this to show you all some stuff real quick on this. Whenever you get the strings off of this, look at the fiddle peg style of tuner on this banjo, right? These pegs, you've got to, the only way they work is a 3-degree taper on that peg that matches a 3-degree taper in this peg hole. And the only thing that keeps it in there is tension. And what helps tension is beeswax. You can also you can buy a commercial product called peg dope, and you can also use violin rosin, which is made from pine resin, I think. Resin. I just use beeswax. I used to be a beekeeper for years, so I've got a big ball of wax that I've been using for years. I rub this shaft. Every time you have the strings off on a old, you know, antique or minstrel banjo or mountain banjo, something that's got these old fiddle pegs on it, go ahead and wax up those pegs every single time. Get it back in there real good. Now that I've got this string off, I'm just going to let y'all watch real quick as I string one of these up. So I'm finding the hole, I feed the string through. On steel strings, it doesn't matter. Just get it in through the hole and start winding it and make it wind from the bottom. Steel strings, you don't have to tie any kind of knot. But on this, you get it in there, and what do I like to do here? come around this way. See, it's hard to, I can't really show y'all. You have to come up with your own way. I have never figured out a way to show anybody on camera how to do this, but what I do is I tie a knot. So there's actually, it's not really a knot, but it's just the string passes under itself and it loops up snug against the hole in the post. It's hard to show. And then, but here, look, watch me. I'm winding the string from the bottom. And I'm watch this finger right here is holding it down to ensure that it winds from the bottom. The other thing, you'll notice I'm exerting pressure this way from the back of the peg into the peg head. Every time you twist this peg, it naturally backs itself out. So if you just turn it without applying any forward pressure, it'll screw itself out. Its natural tendency is to fall out. So every time you twist, you got to apply a little forward pressure. Maybe not every time, but like every third turn or something, you better, and your last turn, you better press it home. Okay, I guess that's all I need to show you on banjo setup.